Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, the podcast that delves into the diverse and impactful roles scientists can play beyond the lab. With me, David Mendes. Today, I have the great pleasure of having with me Sue Ashford. Sue is the Michael and Susan Gender Noah Professor in the Management and Organizations Group at the University of Michigan, Stephen M. Ross School of Business. She was previously taught at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College and received her master's and PhD degrees from Northwestern University. Sue's passion is using her teaching and research to help people to be maximally effective in their work lives, with an emphasis on self-leadership, proactivity, personal growth, and leadership and its development. Her teaching at the Ross School currently focuses on the Executive MBA program, negotiation, and several short-term executive education programs, leadership, change, and growth. She also teaches regularly in the Leading Women Executives program of the Corporate Leadership Center and for various companies. Sue is an award-winning scholar, having published papers in the field's best journals in the areas of leadership development and leader effectiveness, middle management voice and issue selling, job insecurity, and individual proactivity. Her research has been summarized as advice for managers in the Harvard Business Review, the Harvard Business Review blog, New York Magazine, and The Conversation. She's a fellow of the Academy of Management, recognizing the top 10% of scholars worldwide. Sue was awarded the prestigious Career Achievement Award for Distinguished Scholarly Contributions to Management by the Academy of Management in 2017 and the OB Division Lifetime Achievement Award in 2020. Her recent book, The Power of Flexing: How to Use Small Daily Experiments to Create a Life-Changing Growth by HarperCollins, brings together all of her research and teaching over the years into one place to help people grow their personal and interpersonal effectiveness to be both successful in today's world and the person they most want to be. Sue is a native Californian and the daughter of two native Californians. She lives now in Ann Arbor, Michigan with her husband, also a University of Michigan faculty member, and with whom she raised three daughters. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, Sue.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm super happy to have you here. And already there's been some keywords that I mentioned when talking about the power of flexing, your book. One of them is self-leadership, and I'm sure we're going to have time to dive into it. But before diving into that, maybe for the people who are just getting to know you, what would you add in terms of how you gravitated toward your field of research and how you kind of went into that journey of getting a PhD and going the academic route?
Yeah, for me, I fell in love. There's no other way really to put it. I fell in love with a field. I grabbed on as an totally uninformed undergrad to one leg of the field. It's not even a very prominent leg, called organizational development. I met someone through my work who was doing organizational development training in companies. And I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. You know, people have to go to work. If we could make workplaces better, it'd be so great, etc. And I applied to graduate schools. And along the way of applying, someone said, do you think you ever want to teach? And it was just a random question. I said, well, maybe. And that is an answer that gets me into trouble over and over in my career. And so the person said, well, then you ought to get a PhD. And so I said, okay. And that's how green I was. I had no concept. I was very lucky to get admitted to Northwestern's PhD program. And I was the greenest of green PhDs. I didn't know what research was, much less having done it, like many of our applicants these days. And when I got there, I realized they're not interested in producing corporate trainers or people in organizations. They're interested in producing researchers, but by then I was pretty hooked. Somehow I managed my way through the PhD program. It was hard. I still, I went back to Northwestern many years after getting a PhD, and I walked around going, wow, it's so beautiful here. Like I didn't remember that. I just remembered it as a time of stress. Um, but the beautiful thing about this career that I fell in love with is you can do it once you get your PhD, and then certainly once you get tenure, you can do it in a lot of different ways. You can be a corporate trainer if that's what you really want to be. I actually came to love the research process. I'm still active doing it at my career stage, but it gives you a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of ways to be, and that is really the total blessing of this line of work is the freedom it offers.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting story. I really like the fact that you mentioned that you weren't cognizant of all it meant when someone mentioned
Not
it
at
to
all.
you, and kind of had to discover it after. I think a lot of us do not have the full picture of what a PhD is until we have our feet in a program. But it's I think it's part of the learning. Sometimes those maybes are the things that move us forward to parts of our life that we hadn't really planned but end up being good choices. So I don't think it's a negative thing per se. Surprise and the unknown is, can have positive outcomes. But for my audience, I always try and well, my wish for them is that they're the most that they know the map as best as possible of what's coming, so that they have less bad surprises, let's say.
Totally agree. It would have been good. The maybes are around, Hazel Marcus, a famous psychologist from Michigan, introduced this idea of possible selves. And my problem is I have so many of them living in my head, possible selves. I could be anything from the most serious, thinker in our field, Carl Weick, all the way to Malcolm Gladwell, who basically interprets and popularizes our research. And I think it'd be cool to be all of them. And it gets me in trouble.
There's a positive to it, though. And it's funny because I usually, when talking with graduate students who tend to, and it's normal, I went through that and I was like that, to have this tunnel vision of running this marathon until their thesis is done, and then we'll see what happens, to try and get them to beforehand imagine a multiverse of things. And now it's fashionable to talk about multiverses because Marvel has made it all of a rage. But these different possibilities, if you use them as a tool to make hypotheses of what might happen, I think it's a good thing, and it's a creative way of using your brain. And anyway, I also think it can be positive. Of course, if you start engaging yourself in a multitude of different avenues, then the resources aren't infinite, and then that's where things might get a little bit dicey. Very good. Now, one of the things that I'd like to ask you, you've went into this academic journey doing research, and it feels like I mentioned it at the beginning that you kind of distilled a lot of that into this book, The Power of Flexing. What is the process of looking at this whole history of publishing and of researching and making it into something that's going to be more wide audience?
Yeah. So, and I imagine it wouldn't be true for all academics. I don't know how broad your audience is, but if you have biologists and information systems PhDs, it may not be true. In my field, really starting with Malcolm Gladwell, he began translating really straightforward scientific research for a popular audience. And he opened up kind of a genre that none of us had really thought of. In the days before, if you thought about writing a book, it was a scholarly book aimed at scholarly audiences. And so Malcolm Gladwell did that. Adam Grant, who was one of our students from Michigan, um, did that and is continuing to do that. And a couple of our other students did. And I don't know, my research has always been, I thought, very practical for people. Not that everybody else has noticed this, but it was in my head that there's stuff I could say from this research that would be useful to people. And I was doing it in my teaching, and I was mostly doing it around developing your leadership. I teach executive programs. I teach a lot of would-be leaders or emerging leaders, that kind of thing. And when I started to write the book, it was going to be about developing as a leader. And then my agent pointed out that, really, this is a book about growing personally and growing your personal effectiveness and your interpersonal effectiveness. And leaders aren't the only ones who want to be more personally and interpersonally effective. It was such an obvious point. I couldn't see it given where my head was. And it really opened up so much, that one comment. The book, it was then cast as growing yourself, growing your personal effectiveness, personal meaning things that just relate to you, like your time management, your stress management, your, the mind chatter in your head, all of that. And then your interpersonal effectiveness, how you come across to people, whether you can influence people, whether, you attract colleagues and co-authors or repel them, all of that. But also, how to be a better parent, how to be a better sibling, how to be a better community member, how to be more effective in your church, synagogue, and mosque, all of that. Like, we all want to be more personally effective. So the book was broadened after her comment to include all of that. But it just, it really is a red thread through my research, that it's all based on helping people to be more effective.
And that's why, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned Adam Grant, because it was in talking with him that he recommended me to come talk with you. So
nice.
It's kind of a a loop here of how do you say, the full circle type of thing. But why I find this really interesting is, from what I see, you were thinking of people in companies, people in leadership positions, and then it kind of opened up after that comment to, actually, this is applicable to anyone who lives in society, basically.
Well, in fact, it's been very interesting to me. Like, people have sent this to their college graduating seniors who have to figure out how to make a way in the world that's new because they've only been in school. And people have sent this to their retirement age parents who have to figure out how to handle that chapter. That's so amazing. It really has had this resonance.
I love it. And of course, what you just mentioned about the graduates is why I kind of found it was super interesting, because the audience that I'm always thinking about and talking to and talking with are finishing or in the middle or finishing their PhD. And I know, even if they don't, that they have this kind of ordeal of now figuring out what's going to happen after, how to talk about what they did, how to explain to someone who might be an employer but doesn't really know what a PhD is, how with this journey this academic journey that they just finished, how they can contribute to their teams, etc. And it's daunting to a lot of the graduates, the people who are finishing out there, and it's a moment of some existential crises. If they started on the path to be professors and end up now going outside academia. And that's why I really find it interesting what you say, how there was this shift of view, and how it's now, you've seen from real world examples that it goes from college level to retirement. But I think it's really something that has a potential for application and to be powerful for graduate students. And you know them well, you know them very, very well. So yeah, this just confirms and just, makes me super, super happy that you accepted to be here, because one of the obstacles that I get when trying to get people to think about 3 years from now, the first one is, well, the one we mentioned, is time. I don't have time for that. And the other one, there's some cognitive dissonance if they haven't figured out that it's useful to, yes, do your academic work, but keep in mind that you're in a world that's more than just academic, and that having contacts outside and that having experience outside of academia can be positive for your career, even if you stay in academia. And when you start telling that, often their eyes glaze over, and it's been a difficult conversation to have, or to to have fructify.
I deal a lot with people whose eyes glaze over because I teach very busy executives and I want to put growth on their agenda. And what I love about the book is it's really designed to fit within a very busy life. The whole thing is not a big lift. It's all about very small incremental lifts that can allow you to enhance your effectiveness over time.
People who are listening or watching, this is not coming from me, it's coming from Sue, right? This is not a big lift. The idea and the concepts we'll be talking about are easy ways to gain skills, to gain self-leadership, which is, it's maybe something we can start with, because it feels like it's central to the book, and it's a concept that I'm not so familiar with, although I can kind of intuit what it means. But yeah, well, the first thing, and it's really important for people who are listening, is this is going to be, it's not something you're going to have to be adding to your routine, and you're going to have put stuff away in your day to day for that to fit. It's really tiny incremental things. So don't be don't be scared of this. Oh, David's bringing us another thing to do.
Right. Yeah, the book really starts with the idea that you're going to have experiences anyway. And we know from research on leadership that people grow their personal and interpersonal effectiveness from experiences predominantly. And then the insight is that there's nothing inherent in an experience that means you'll grow, but it's you paying attention in certain ways that allows and enables that growth. So I look at it as there's many threads in an experience. One of them is the content, what you're doing anyway. You're writing your thesis, you're meeting with co-authors. You're going to do that anyway. And then if you could just add a second thread, which is just bring a focus to a place where you want to improve and bring that into that experience, you can then use the experience to both get the article written, get the dissertation written, get the co-author thing going fine, but you're also learning something about yourself. So I often encourage people to just get in touch with where that is, the place you need to grow. You mentioned building a network. For some people, it may be shyness. We'll often say we have no time when really what we mean is it scares me to do that. But we don't like saying that, so we say the other. And so get in touch with the place you need to grow. Some people need to work on being better listeners. Some people need to work on being short talkers rather than long talkers. Some people need to learn about being more influential, speak in a more powerful tone of voice, for example, is an issue with several doctoral students I know. And then when you're doing what you'd be doing anyway, having that meeting, sitting down, doing that writing, you just have in your mind that thing you're working on as well. So it's kind of intertwining how you want to grow with what you're doing anyway. That's the only way I know to help busy people grow, is to take what they're doing anyway and just ask them to bring this focus on themselves into it.
And how does that materialize? Because it feels to me that from what you say, that it takes some sort of introspection. So there needs to be a moment where you need to identify this muscle that you want to work
Correct.
with, right?
Yeah.
How do you, if it's not a habit you have, some people already journal and maybe they have a ease of doing those things, but a lot of people I know are really very tunnel visioned, and they kind of overwhelmed, and they really feel like there's no iota of space for me to put anything else on my plate.
Yeah. Well, this isn't putting much on your plate, because you're going to go to that meeting with your co-authors. You're going to sit down and have a writing session anyway. So when do you get the idea for how you need to grow? So we interviewed a lot of people for the book, and those triggers for growth came down to two broad buckets. And both of these happen in our life. So we kind of come to understand where we need to grow naturally in the course of living our life. One is what we call, the first bucket is called, we labeled the pain of the present. And in the pain of the present, there's something that's happening in your life that's either causing you pain or you're causing other people pain, and you care about that. If you're a long talker, you can notice people getting impatient around you, and they're shifting in their seats. They maybe interrupt, that kind of thing. And you're like, okay, I'm not having the impact I want to have. So that's pain in the present. People have noticed all sorts of things. There's one woman we talked to in the group. She caused pain just by her overly effervescent positivity, which you would think would be just a blessing for everyone around you. But what it meant was nobody else could be positive because they couldn't be up to her level. And she found, and nobody else could say anything negative. So this is just observing what's going on around you. Another guy talked about his perfectionism. And his perfectionism, he knew, was a problem when his dentist said he needed to sleep with a mouth splint because he was grinding his teeth out of the anxiety generated by his perfection. So it was causing him pain, like real pain. So a lot of times it's just noticing. And I'll tell you about the second bucket. But the thing that people ask me all the time is, what do I mean by flexing in this book? Well, one of the meanings is that it's a flexible system. You can pick it up and use these ideas, and then you can put it down. So maybe something is coming up, like you have to give a talk. You might decide to work on, while you're giving the talk, work on your self-talk. Work on managing your anxiety before the talk. And then you don't work on anything for a while. You go back into your tunnel vision about your dissertation, and then some other thing comes up that causes you pain, or you see you're causing others pain. You pick up a set of ideas and you work on them, then you put them down. The second place people got sort of insights into where they need to grow is something we called fantasies of the future. So these are like fantasies you have, like I have one. Future Sue is very zen. She doesn't get agitated. She doesn't get impatient. She's very zen. Nothing phases her. Current Sue has troubles with some of those things. So it might be just your fantasy of how you want to be, but it might also be someone you see. Maybe you meet an academic in your field who's very inspiring to you, either in their speaking, in the way they include other people around them, in their writing, whatever it is. And it's kind of a pull. It's, where do I need to grow to be more like that person? And both of those places are, you have to be observant about your life, but it doesn't take a lot of time. You come out of a meeting where you go, whoa, I did something in that meeting that really didn't work well. Then you think about what it is. Maybe you ask someone, and then you say, oh, okay, I want to work on that. One person who's named Simon in the book, he said he wanted to work on becoming more approachable because around the time he was starting this task force, he said one more person than was comfortable described him as formidable. And formidable people are not approachable. They tend to repel others. And so that was just a comment someone made. That takes no time at all to get a comment, say, oh, I don't want that. So I want to grow to be other than that. And so he put that on his agenda.
Mm-hmm. And then he went on to try and flex that muscle in actual life situations.
Yes, he was starting around the time this happened. He explained that he was starting. There was a task force starting up that he was charged with leading. And so he set a goal to work on becoming more approachable in this task force. So he didn't work on it 24/7. The task force met once a month. And when that came up, he worked on it. And the way the practice in the book that talks about the working on it is under the label experimenting. So he came up with like 3 little things he decided to try in this task force to see if he could work on it.
This sounds like a difficult one, because not being approachable might seem like something that's intrinsic and really difficult to unravel. So I'm really curious to hear at least one or two of those practices that
He did 3 things. He decided to get to the meetings early and greet everybody as they arrived. And so what he did to remind himself of that is when that 10-minute warning that we all get before meetings, like most of us try to figure out, what's an 8-minute task I can slide in there? And then, the 8-minute task takes 12 minutes and we arrive late to the meeting. And that was who Simon was. He would just like hand out, notebooks and get everybody started. And he said, I'm going to get there early. I'm going to commit to standing up when that buzzer goes off, that alert goes off, and walking to the meeting. I'll be there early and I'm going to greet everyone when they arrive.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of his usual mode of just being task, he was like, hey, David, can you believe how much snow we got lately? Or, did you get to do that trip you talked about at the last meeting? Thereby making him more a person you can connect with. Second experiment was he chose to sit at the side of the table rather than the head of the table. The head of the table is the power position, as we all know, but he wanted to reduce the power, particularly for the junior people at the table. So he sat at the side. And because he got there early, that one was super easy because he was there, right? He just set his stuff down. And the third one was the one that's so simple, but these are the kinds of things that make a difference. And he thought this made the most difference. He decided he would smile more. It turns out he had a resting face that was not as bad as the one that just went through the heads of everyone listening, but it was somber. It was a sort of a blank, stony resting face. And he might be thinking warm thoughts. And he said, actually, I typically was. I was thinking, gosh, we haven't heard from David. I really would like to, but my face didn't communicate that. So he tried to smile more. And he reminded himself about that one, I thought, in a very clever way. He put a little Post-it of a smiley face on his committee materials. So he'd look down, he'd see it, and like, oh yeah, I want to smile.
That's amazing. I really, really love those. And this one, of course, is, I think, the most striking and also maybe simplest, because it's just smiling. But all of them are fairly simple. They're good examples of how simple and practical these things can be. And he didn't have to prepare for them. They're just inserted organically in what he is going to do already.
Yeah. And I could go on. There's a lot of stories in the book of the goals people adopted for themselves, the types of goals, and then what they decided to do. And there's fewer on how they reminded themselves. That one has kind of come to me since the book, but I do think it's important. I can tell you a great reminding story. This was a guy who was pretty high up in K through 12 education, and he said he had a board member. And for some reason, this board member was very difficult for him to listen to. She talked in a way that made him defensive. He wanted to jump in and explain, and he felt put down. It was hard for him to hear her. But he knew it was important that he had this relationship. And so some of your listeners may have a professor that is hard to listen to for them in one-on-one meetings, or a class, a cohort mate. And so it's a problem that all of us have. I used to have a guy when I was the senior associate dean that I told my assistant, I can't meet with him on Mondays and Fridays. It's too hard. He's he's very negative and cynical. I go, I can take him on, Tuesday to Thursday, but not on those 2 days. So, we all have those people. But what this guy did was very ingenious. He wasn't with the board that often, and a lot of their communication was by phone. So he went into his contacts, and for her name, he just wrote the word listen, exclamation point. So every time she called, what came up was listen, exclamation point. Reminded him, oh yeah, this is that woman. I really want to listen. And he, it lasted a while, and then he took it down because they developed a relationship and they were fine.
That's amazing. And it shows how we are beings of routine and of habit. But habits you can break them and you can transmute them into something else. This is really, really smart. I really love it. And I'm sure people that are listening can use it for themselves on a Google notification or something like that, to have a little keyword that makes
Possibly.
them remember. Yeah.
If their issue is person specific in particular.
Exactly. Now, one of the things that, because we were talking about shyness earlier on, and it's been something that I've heard myself with the graduate students that I've been working with, repeatedly, and because I mentioned also networking, and I do think that one of the things that most hinder young researchers after getting their degree in having a smooth transition to the after is not having worked enough in building their network, be it academic or diversified. And one of the things that I remember hearing a lot is being at a conference and not being able to put themselves forward and establish relationships out of shyness. They have this difficulty. It feels to me like there is potential to use one of these strategies or to set up small experiments that can help them in that setting. Is there maybe a story, one of the stories that aligns with this sort of problematic, or just from your experience, is there something that you can suggest to someone who is going to a conference and who ends up going back home at the end and feeling like, oh, I met no one, I was just at my poster, feeling a bit exposed and shy?
Yeah, well, first of all, just for anyone listening who has that issue, is to know that that's how most everyone feels for the first 10 years of your career. I mean, I went home, I left my main conference sobbing for various years, either because of that issue or somebody said something about my work. There's a lot of negative feedback in our world, and it does take a little bit of a tough skin. But I also was very shy, didn't quite know how to break that open. And to be honest, I can still feel that way walking into a room now filled with people way younger than me, right? So it's not just the young people who haven't broken in yet who feel this. I mean, everyone can feel it because we're all humans, and we can feel different than or not valued in different ways. So suggest, I mean, this is just, I'm not sure these come from the book. I don't think we talked to anyone for whom that was their issue. But just from my own experience and so forth, one is to have a wing person, a wingman, a wing woman, someone you walk into those kind of tense rooms with, and will stand with you. And then the second is to look for someone else who doesn't have anybody. If it is a universal issue, chances are there are other people there who are having the same issue at that moment. And it might be someone way senior than you standing there going, what do I do with this room full of young people? And might really enjoy having someone come up to them and start talking. The third thing would be what you say, how you interact. And I just would caution against the selling of the self in that moment, or at least be thoughtful about how that comes up. A lot of people at my career stage, which is pretty senior, experience our conferences as endless stream of people trying to sell themselves. And so, what a tonic it is to have someone come up and say, gosh, I'm so excited to be at this conference. What's been your most motivating, exciting, whatever experience? And then share your own, the talk you went to that inspired you. And, then you're naturally starting to talk about the thing that brought us all together, which is, for many of us, we just love this field, and so I love hearing what young people are doing and what issues are capturing their attention, et cetera. And if you talk enthusiastically about that, it naturally leads to, hey, I'll send you a paper later. And then, then you have a connection with someone rather than saying, I need to network, I need to make connections. And some of it is reframing how you think about networking. Tiziana Cassiara has a beautiful paper about this and talks about, she did a study where they had words where you fill in the blank, and like one could be wish or one could be wash. And people that had a negative view of networking used more words that were more about laundering, cleaning away the dirty feeling, you have, that kind of thing. And the wash and wish is the only one I remember, but there were several there. And you can think about networking as this dirty thing I have to do, or you can think about it as a way to connect with this field we all love and have more connection. More connections, the more fun you'll have, and the more resources you will have, people you can call on, etc. But a lot of it is just fun. If you remember, we all are in this because we like it. Some people are jerks, but a lot of people aren't.
I love it. And it feels to me like if we boil this down to exercises, one exercise could be when I'm like at my poster, I try each day to identify 2 or 3 people who are kind of also alone and that I might then go and meet after. That could be one thing.
Or at the cocktail party, which I think is everyone's biggest fear. The poster, you can just stand there, and that's what people do in their posters. So you're in a role.
And you have a role. You have an assigned role that.
It's the cocktail party where you walk in and everybody else is talking to other people except you, or at least that's how it feels.
Yeah, it's how it feels. And the other one would be then the other layer could be thinking of 1 or 2 easy questions you would ask of someone instead of thinking of telling what you do. Or talking immediately about yourself, to say, okay, if I find someone, I'm going to start by showing interest in the person, and then I guess it is easier from there to then keep build a conversation and get to know.
Also, don't forget the power of flattery. I mean, flattery, if it sounds sincere, so particularly if it is sincere, is very exciting to people. We come into this field, we put things out there in the world, but our real goal is not to get tenure, not to get a job. Our real goal is to have impact, to have ideas that make a difference to other people, to have ideas that help other people or help organizations, for people who get drawn off into practice, but help other scholars to move something forward. So, to have someone come up to you, and don't just pick senior scholars, but some young person whose article you read, and to say, gosh, what you wrote in that article really made a difference for me. You see, I'm working on Y, and when you said X, I really was able to use that in this way. That can really mean a lot to people and ease a connection. Sincerity is good here.
Sincerity is always good, of course. Now, one I did mention that I'd love to hear a little bit about self leadership, because it is something that I had not heard before, and maybe because we're getting to the end of our hour here, maybe can you talk a little bit about that, and because I think it might be something that's also interesting to explore for the audience.
So self-leadership grows out of a tradition in my field, organizational behavior, out of a focus on what's called self-management. And self-management is kind of like, how do you manage yourself to achieve your goals? So every PhD student is a self-manager. Yes, they may have an advisor, and yes, there are rules for what they need to accomplish, but there's so much free space, like in the long span of getting it done, that on a given Tuesday, you have to manage yourself to sit down, to do writing, to feel good about what you did, to feel motivated to do it the next day, to keep yourself on task, all that thing, motion control, all of those are under self-management. Self-leadership, which is now considered to encompass all of that, but what they added to it, it became self-leadership when they added, you also set your goals.
Mm-hmm.
You also set your desires. So self-leadership is, your questions about what kind of a PhD grad do I want to be? Do I want to be an industry-focused grad? Do I want to be an academic, traditional academic grad? Do I want to be a creative industry grad in some way, so even so that's on the macro level. You set your own goals. You're leading yourself to goals that you have set for yourself, as opposed to just doing what other people tell you to do. And so even in the dissertation, that's really important, because a lot of us had hunches in our dissertation time that our advisors said, yeah, that's a worthwhile hunch. But it came from us. It came from our belief that the field needed to go in this direction, study this topic. And so that's an example of self-leadership. It's like you personally, through your own agency, are identifying the goals you're going to pursue. And then self-management is your ability to adopt a set of practices and habits that enables that pursuit.
And why I think it's super interesting, and thanks for the clarification and the explanation. Why I think it's really interesting is because the supervisor graduate student relationship has this hierarchy to it, but it feels to me, and tell me if you agree, like the graduate student, although they're under the supervision of this person who has more experience, who has been there for a longer time, who has a body of research. The student is not just being towed by the supervisor. There needs to be an aspect of self-leadership there, because they're a burgeoning researcher. They're a burgeoning scientific who's going to be in industry, and
Yep.
So there's another story, there's another book that's being written, which is theirs. And I feel that often, and it may have been how I started during in the PhD journey, you come from what you've studied, the way you've studied and gone through school before, and you don't go into this mode of, okay, now this is kind of a prelude to my professional life. And I feel that leads to, again, more friction at the end when you get your degree. And then you're kind of thinking, okay, now I need to make something out of this professionally. I don't know if this resonates with you, or if...
Yeah, for sure. You're working under the supervision of an advisor, but the next project you work without any supervision, and that's true for the rest of your life. So the more you can act as if it's true now, and you can act on your own agency, the better equipped you'll be to do it when it's true, right? But, of course, you need to be in a system that allows that. So, we treat our PhD students basically as co-authors now. And, we're waiting on them to get their idea, and we're waiting on them to move it forward, that kind of thing, as opposed to us kind of doing it all and they just sort of fold into our research program.
And so in this context of thinking of changing, let's say, your mindset around what it is for you to go through this ordeal and through this process, which is a PhD, is there maybe a last example you can show of how someone was able to flex and develop their self-leadership in a situation where they were maybe more, just rolling with the punches and following the moves, but they felt, I need to have more agency and to decide a little bit more?
Well, I can give an example from my life, and it has to do with listening to your advisor. And it's like when you first realize that your parents aren't always right. You have to come to that realization about your advisor as well. And I had done my dissertation on sort of something that flipped the script in an area. And then I thought, I said to him, you could flip that script in this other area as well. I said, because they haven't looked at it in this alternative way. And he said, I don't think you'll find that to be true. So I waited 3 years, didn't do anything on that. And then someone else wrote the paper that flipped the script in that second area. And it just, let me know that my advisor's not always right. And there's a reason to trust your gut of when you're on to something interesting. And so, that was kind of a key moment for me where I flipped more into my own agency rather than just assuming that there's a structure out there that's always right.
Sue, we're really getting to the end of the interview, and the name of the book is The Power of Flexing. Of course, it's longer than that, but
that'll get you there.
It'll get you there. But if they want to reach out to you, ask you questions about this, or give you feedback on what you said, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Well, susanashford.com is my web address, and it has information on the book. It has a little survey you can take about yourself, that kind of thing. So that probably is the best way. And then you can message me from there if you need to.
Can they write to you if they start experimenting and have comments on their experiments?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to hear it. Yeah, that'd be great. The idea of this set of ideas is that it's supposed to be very empowering and not very onerous. And so I'd love to hear about times when you felt that was true.
Yeah, do contact Sue. But I do feel that this is really, really well suited for graduate students, because the time, like I said, is a resource they don't feel like they have, at least. And experimenting is part of their day-to-day. So why not just add another layer of experimenting to things that empower them? And I do think a lot of there's a lot of feelings of being buffeted left and right by different things, and the empowerment through experimentation, I think, is a really, really great solution, especially in the very micro dosage format that you propose.
Changes, yes.
Sue,
right, it was a delight to talk with you.
Same here. It was a delight. Thank you so much for having shared your time with me and with the audience. I'm looking forward to our next conversation, where we'll be talking specifically about preparing for after the PhD. And see you soon.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another Beyond the Thesis conversation with me, David Mendes, and my guest, Sue Ashford. I hope you enjoyed all the gold nuggets that she had to share. I'm definitely going to go back to our conversation and take notes, because there was so much that's applicable to the community. If you like Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, and if you want to be in the credits for production of an episode, I am preparing the celebration of 5 years of Papa PhD with a series of special episodes. You can go to papaphd.com/donate. And if you mention that you want to be in the credits, I will add you to the list. Thank you for listening, and see you on another episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD.